Mess. The mess, also called a mess deck aboard ships, is an area where military personnel socialize, eat, and in some cases live. The term is also used to indicate the groups of military personnel who belong to separate messes, such as the officers' mess, the chief petty officer mess, and the enlisted mess. In some civilian societies, this military usage has been extended to the eating arrangements of other disciplined services such as firefighting and police forces. The root of mess is the Old French mess portion of food cf. Modern French mets, drawn from the Latin verb mittere, meaning to send, and to put cf. Modern French mettre, the original sense being a course of a meal put on the table, cfr. Also the modern Italian portata with the same meaning, past participle of portare, to bring. This sense of mess, which appeared in English in the 13th century, was often used for cooked or liquid dishes in particular, as in the mess of pottage, porridge, or soup, or Eton mess. Canada, Germany, Germany, Germany. The Federal German Armed Forces Bundeswehr differentiates between three different mess areas. 1. HVG Heimbetriebsgesellschaft, more commonly called enlisted Messmannschaft. It is common for most bases to have one where food and drink can be purchased. Newspapers and in some cases equipment and souvenirs such as key chains may also be available. There is generally no strict regulation of conduct, even though access is not limited to enlisted personnel, and NCO or officers may also be present, ensuring some regulation of conduct. 2. UHG Unteroffizierheim or Unteroffizierheimgesellschaft lit. Society, also called UK NCO Comradeship / Unteroffizierkameradschaft, non-commissioned officers mess. This is the area where NCO can dine or spend their evenings. As opposed to the HVG, the UHG has a constitution, bylaws, and a board. Access is usually restricted to NCO, while officers can gain entry, even though it is usually frowned upon by the NCO. Some bases have a joint NCOS and officers' mess. 3. OHG officers mess / Offizierheimgesellschaft, also called casino or offizier casino. Much like the UHG, the casino also has a constitution, bylaws, and a board. Gentlemanly conduct is mandatory. For instance, upon entering the main hall, officers are expected to stand at attention and perform a small bow. Additionally, veterans' meetings are usually held either in a UHG or in a casino. As with the UHG, casinos have permanent personnel, as a general rule enlisted men, called Ordnansen, a military term for waiter or barman. Some casinos have grand pianos and hold recitals, as well as having music played during luncheons or dinners. Official events such as balls and unofficial events such as weddings, informational events, and the like are held here. The German Navy call their messes Messen, with the distinction Offiziermess. The land-based messes are also called Offiziermessen. India. The Indian Army follows a system similar to the British. A typical regiment/unit would have one mess and two clubs, one for the commissioned officers, club for the junior commissioned officers JCO, and one for the NCO. Havildars/staffers, equivalent to sergeants, are considered to be NCO. The Air Force, however, has an SNCO SR, NCO mess for warrant officers and sergeants, while lower-ranking NCO would be members of the NCO mess. In the officers' mess and the JCO club, there also is rank of mess havildar. A mess havildar is a senior NCO who manages and executes the day-to-day activities of the mess/club. On Republic Day, Jan 26, the JCO are formally invited for cocktails at the officers' mess. This is reciprocated on Independence Day, Aug 15, by the JCO at the JCO club. Israel. In the Israeli Navy, although Hebrew-speaking, dining rooms on the missile ships, dolphin submarines, and the kitchen in the patrol boats are named messes, crew mess and officers' mess. Also, every special meal brought by a crew member, say celebrating a birthday or a rank promotion, is called mess. United Kingdom. On a naval or military establishment, there are usually 2 or 3 messes. The officers' mess for commissioned officers, the chief petty officers or warrant officers and sergeants' mess for senior non-commissioned officers SNCOs and warrant officers WO. The junior rates or corporal's mess JRM for junior NCO. This latter is less universal than the former. 2 officers and SNCOs are required under Queen's regulations to be a member of a mess, and unmarried members usually live, eat, and socialize in them. The JNCO's mess, if established, is normally used for socializing only, JNCOs usually being accommodated in barrack blocks, eating in the cookhouse alongside private soldiers and able rates. Depending on circumstance, such as lack of finance or space, some regiments may have a JNCO club instead of a proper mess. Members of their mess are also required to pay a subscription fee for supplies and upkeep. The amount is decided upon by the commanding officer within the limits stipulated by the regulations. Soldiers, sailors, or air personnel are welcome in any mess for their rank or equivalent, should they be away from their home unit, as long as they are paying dues in at least one mess. For the warrant officers and sergeants' mess, the highest ranking, normally the RSM member, is known as the presiding member. A mess is run by the mess committee, a group democratically elected by the members of the mess except wardrooms, but normally agreed by the CO or RSM. President of the mess committee, PMC officers mess, or chairman of the mess committee, sergeants/petty officers mess. Vice president of the mess committee, Mr. Vice, who is responsible for toasts during mess dinners. He or she is rarely the deputy of the PMC. Normally this is the secretary, but instead the most junior person in the mess. Treasurer, secretary sec, who is responsible for records and minutes, etc. Wines member, who is responsible for keeping the bar stocked. House member, who is responsible for furniture and infrastructure. Entertainments ends member, for any special events or parties in the mess. Some messes also have a senior living-in member, SLIM, who represents the living-in members. The commanding officer, CO of the unit, has right of veto over the mess, and any changes or events must have his approval. The CO is allowed into any mess because they are legally all his, but it is often considered an abuse of power, unbecoming conduct, or disturbing the order for a CO to drink in a lower rank mess, except when invited on special occasions. The officers' mess in a Royal Navy ship or base is called the wardroom. Associated with the wardroom is a gunroom, the mess for midshipmen and occasionally junior sub-lieutenants. The captain of a vessel is not normally a member of the wardroom, which is always run by the first lieutenant or executive officer XO, thereby known as the mess president, mess pres. This post is part of the job of being a ship's XO. Other committee members are generally appointed voluntarily or otherwise by the XO. Mess dress is the military term for the formal evening dress worn in the mess or at other formal occasions. It is also known as mess kit. Mess dress would be worn at occasions requiring white tie or black tie. United States, U.S. Army. In the United States Army, officers historically have had to purchase their own food using funds allocated to each officer. In the far-flung forts of the American Old West, officers would organize their food service in 2 ways. Closed mess was when the few officers of a small fort would pool all of their food funds to provide all meals to members only, thus being closed to outsiders except as guests. In a larger post, the larger pool of officers could allow the officers to purchase meals on an individual meal basis after payment of a small monthly dues amount. Such arrangements were called open messes. The mess now is called a dining facility or Dining Facilities Administration Center DFAC. The Officers' Club O Club is an outgrowth comparable to the Officers' Open Mess, but also providing areas to allow officers to entertain guests. A similar version for enlisted personnel is the E-Club. Mess also describes the formal affair of having a dining-in held for military members and closed to the public, or a dining out, a social event for military personnel and their families. For much of the 20th century, the Army's mess food selection was Spartan, But after the end of the draft, they changed to a food court model with more variety, including fast food, while also making fast food franchises available on bases. In 2011, the Army rolled out a program known as Soldier Athlete, which promotes healthier foods including low-fat milk, whole grains, and veggie wraps. U.S. Navy is Navy is Navy is Navy S Navy S Navy is Navy is Navy is Navy Navy is Navy is Navy is Navy S Navy is Navy is at most United States Navy shore installations, galleys previously called enlisted dining facilities in the 1970s and early 1980s provide messing for sailors and if assigned enlisted Marines ashore and as an option for sailors and if assigned enlisted Marines aboard ships while in port at those installations. Commissioned officers may use these facilities if in a duty officer status, e.g., squadron duty officer, command duty officer, etc., under the pretext of inspecting/sampling the mess. In addition to galleys ashore, various social clubs with dining facilities may also exist. These are enlisted clubs for sailors in the grade of petty officer first class (6) and below, chief petty officer clubs for CPO (7), CPOs (8) and MPOs (9), and officers' clubs for commissioned officers, although many have been closed, merged into combination enlisted/CPO clubs, or converted into. Such changes began to be imposed following the congressionally mandated end-of-duty budgetary subsidies for all such clubs in the 1990s and the subsequent need for these clubs to be financially self-sufficient. Further impacting the club system ashore for the Navy is the fact that most naval units deploy for extended periods, e.g., 6 to 10 months on a regular basis with, especially for shipboard personnel, requiring for senior enlisted personnel and commissioned officers to maintain concurrent membership in a ship's CPO mess or officer's wardroom, respectively. At sea aboard naval vessels, messing is still separate, with (6) and below utilizing the ship's mess decks, (7) through (9) utilizing the ship's CPO mess, and commissioned officers being part of the wardroom. Certain large vessels, e.g., aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, may also include a first-class mess for (6), typically a separate dining area adjacent to the mess decks. This is considered a chance for future CPO to learn how to be a part of a mess before they enter the CPO mess, often called by the sobriquet of goat locker. Enlisted personnel normally receive all meals at what appears to be no cost, but in fact subsidize their meals through forfeiture of their basic allowance for subsistence BAs, also called commuted rations, although chief petty officers may also have a mess buy-in or monthly mess bill equivalent to the BAs. For those ships with embarked Marine Corps personnel, staff non-commissioned officers in the grades of (7), (8), and (9) will also be part of the CPO mess. Commissioned officers retain their BAs, a flat rate allowance much smaller than the graduated by rank amount paid out to enlisted personnel. However, they must pay for all of their meals while afloat out of pocket. This usually entails a mess buy-in as a member of the officers' mess and will typically have either a monthly mess bill or will purchase meals via some sort of debit card. U.S. Air Force. Social clubs on United States Air Force installations were at one time called open messes, even though most were known in vernacular as officers' clubs or NCO clubs. Those for officers were able to utilize their initials as colorful acronyms, among the more well-known of which in the 1960s and 1970s were Zaragoza and Zweibrücken Zoom, Danning Dune, Ramstein Room, and Korup Air Bases or Kirtland Air Force Base Kabum, Randolph AFB Auger Inn and Nelly's AFB Robin's Nest, with the nicknames. At one time, each squadron had its club, and some flying squadrons continue to maintain a bar in the squadron facilities for officer and enlisted aircrew to this day, but most disappeared after World War Roman II, and the various airmen's clubs, senior NCO clubs and officers' clubs, became facilities of a base rather than a unit. Most are now officially referred to as officer or enlisted clubs, the term mess or officers' open mess having largely disappeared from the Air Force lexicon. Though a few bases, usually major training bases, have separate airmen's clubs for junior enlisted and NCO clubs for non-commissioned officers, this is no longer normally the case. Physically separate officers' clubs still exist at some installations, however, smaller Air Force installations may have one consolidated club with separate lounges. Membership is voluntary, though highly encouraged for senior NCO and officers. Most NCO and officers' clubs contain a sit-down restaurant in addition to social lounges, meeting/dining rooms, and bars. Mess halls in the USAF, where unmarried junior enlisted residing in the dormitories are expected to eat, are officially referred to as dining facilities, but are colloquially called chow halls, although dining facility workers traditionally take offense at the term. U.S. Marine Corps. In the United States Marine Corps, enlisted dining facilities ashore are commonly referred to as galleys or chow halls. When embarked aboard naval vessels, enlisted Marines and NCO in the rank of Staff Sergeant Eminence 6 and below will use the same mess decks as sailors in the grade of Petty Officer First Class Eminence 6 and below, while Staff NCO in the rank of Gunnery Sergeant Eminence 7 and above will take meals in the Chief Petty Officer's CPO mess. Separate enlisted, NCO, and officers' clubs continue to exist at Marine Corps shore installations, following the Navy model of enlisted, CPO, and officers' clubs. Marine clubs have also been in decline. According to an article by USA Today, alcohol deglamorization in the late 80s started the decline, says Carol Garland, head of the Marine Corps Food and Hospitality, Personal and Family Readiness Division. Congressionally appropriated funds to support the operation of clubs, including managers, were greatly reduced. Without appropriated funds, clubs had to be self-supporting businesses. U.S. Coast Guard. The United States Coast Guard follows the U.S. Navy model in terms of messing facilities afloat and ashore in terms of the demarcation of galleys for Eminence 6 and below, CPO messes for Eminence 7 through Eminence 9, and wardrooms for commissioned officers. The only exception is that, given its small size, there are very few Coast Guard clubs aboard Coast Guard installations, and those that do exist are typically all-hands facilities, e.g. Redtail Lounge at Coast Guard Air Station Clearwater.